Welcome to Versus, where we give complicated answers to simple questions. I'm Colin Sandberg, coach of the Endurance Collective. This is Ben Turits, coach and founder of the Endurance Collective. Hey, Ben.
How's it going, man? It's good to see your face.
Good. Yeah. So I got some feedback after the last episode, mostly from my wife, and she said my background sucks.
I actually, you got a lot of compliments on your quilt.
Oh yeah, I quilted it myself. So I'm just gonna run a couple things by you here really quick, and you can let me know what you think. So what do you think of that?
That's pretty. I like that. It looks very soothing to me.
Okay. I've got. Oh yeah, here's a good one. Okay, what do you think of this?
That's great, but I'm kind of getting dizzy. Are they chasing you?
Yeah, they're chasing. I'm off the front.
You're in the break.
There. Yeah. Okay, and yeah, here I can represent.
I like that.
That's okay.
Yeah.
I think it looks
it's very white.
It is, yeah. Okay, I'm just going back to the quilt, maybe.
Okay. Yeah, people love the quilt.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I got one here.
There, now you're like me.
Yeah. Okay. My wife said we were doing really good. Like I had the professor vibe and you had the cool vibe. So it was a good juxtaposition.
That's about right. As we build our personality cult.
Yeah. So today we're going to be talking about volume versus intensity. And I think this is a huge topic. We could go off, for hours on this in lots of different directions. So maybe let's try to narrow this down a little bit. I think here, there's three key areas. There is, how you define high versus low intensity. There is the composition of time that you spend in high intensity versus low intensity, because I think most people, I don't know anybody who's saying you need to do all high intensity work or all low intensity work. Would you agree on that?
They're called CrossFit athletes.
Okay.
We just lost all of our CrossFit.
Yeah. Props to the CrossFit guys. So it's really just, how much time, how you define that. And then execution, how well you execute them, because I know a lot of people who say they're doing low intensity, but it's not really low intensity as I would define it.
That's huge. I'm excited to get into that topic.
Yeah. Well, how would you define like a low intensity workout or a high intensity workout?
Well, high intensity workouts, typically the high intensity workouts I'm giving are right around threshold or crossing your aerobic threshold. And low intensity workouts, are either recovery, which, a true recovery ride is an art and can be a really challenging thing for a lot of athletes. Tell somebody, I don't want you to cross the 100 watt mark or 100 beats per minute. Your grandmother should be able to come rollerblading past you when you're on this ride. It's about adaptation. And letting
your grandmother.
Yeah. You don't want to show her up.
Yeah.
And then a true aerobic ride. So kind of your mythical zone 2 ride that a lot of people end up doing in high zone 1 or low tempo. And, those are kind of the spots where that ride goes bad. Making sure that you're truly aerobic, but not recovering is really important. And that's where the sausage is made for an endurance athlete. I'm sure we'll get into that more, but I think there's a huge misconception about what an endurance ride is with a lot of people. They end up either going too hard or not hard enough.
Yeah, in my experience, it's usually too hard. At least as I would, we might have slightly different definitions on how we prescribe that. I tend to prescribe an endurance ride. The number one thing I say is keep your heart rate in zone 2 or even zone 1. I'm not usually even that concerned. If somebody's power slips into zone 1, that's fine. Like, keep your heart rate down. And I know it's not the end of the world if somebody's heart rate goes up for a little bit into zone 3. It's not like going to ruin the ride. I mean, I think somebody once told me something like your blood vessels would explode, or your mitochondria would explode if your heart rate goes too high. And obviously that's not true. But I found once I start giving that wiggle room to say, like, okay, well, 10% of your time you can be in zone 3 heart rate, then like they're going to push that. And then suddenly it's like 15 or 20%. And so I'd rather just say, like, aim for 0. That's the most important thing. There's other things I'd like to see, but like, that's the most important for me.
And I definitely have riders who want to, with all workouts, are trying to push the top of the zone always. And that gets dangerous with endurance rides. Because, if you start riding tempo, especially that lower end of tempo, you're getting the same physical adaptation, but you're adding more fatigue.
Yeah.
And so there's no added benefit of riding at that extra, that zone up, but the negative is you are accumulating more fatigue.
Yeah, that's a great point. And it probably cuts to the heart of a lot of this debate. Is there's a notion like the more you suffer, the harder it is, the more benefit you'll get. And that's
not true.
Not always true. Certainly not true for an endurance ride. And I think for some people too that are really paying a lot of attention to their power data, they're looking at that training stress score. And of course, that's going to accumulate faster at a higher power. So it's misleading in a way. They're thinking, well, my TSS is higher, I'm getting more benefit out of this. And I can relate to that. I mean, I think it is it's depressing if you ride, you're riding along an endurance all day and you're only accumulating, I don't know, 25 TSS per hour. It's like,
but that's the danger of burying your nose in the data, especially when you're doing, long blocks of endurance riding. We talked last week. I have a lot of marathon mountain bike racers, and they spend a lot of time riding endurance, and it can be depressing, and that's why a lot of times I'll tell them, we learn how to ride endurance and how to feel what an endurance ride is, and then get your head out of the data and just go ride your bike. Once you've developed that feel, you don't need to stare at your computer, looking down at your computer every 30 seconds to make sure your heart rate or your power is right, because your body is there. Endurance rides should be relatively simple.
Yeah. So what do you think what is the, just to be very clear, what is the drawback? You said, there's no potential benefit to going harder on an endurance ride, but there's a lot of problems there.
Yeah. You're going to accumulate fatigue more quickly. Especially if I've got.
But isn't that a good thing? I mean, playing devil's advocate here.
No, not necessarily. Because if I have something coming up the next day or a few days down the road that is a really challenging, I'll give you an example of a mountain bike racer who has probably 2 or 3 endurance rides a week. And then on the weekend, they've got a really long sweet spot workout.
Mm-hmm.
And if they go into that sweet spot workout more fatigued than I had planned for, it's going to be really challenging for them. They might not be able to ride it. And the whole point is, that sweet spot workout is almost like a race simulation for them. And so it's really important, I want them to get that higher level aerobic adaptation from that workout. But if they spent the whole week accumulating fatigue because they're riding low tempo, we're not getting the benefit of that weekend ride.
Yeah. So basically, if you want to go harder, fine, save it for your hard days. Keep your easy days easy. Keep your hard days hard.
Save it for those harder days. And you know, I think that you get at a really important point there too, is like a lot of people are just thinking about the day they're riding and the next day. But with fatigue accumulation, it's, you know, you got to think about 3, 4, 5 days, and also, you know, weeks. You know, if you've got a 3 or 4 week really robust aerobic block, I mean, that fatigue builds and builds, and you know, you've only got a certain amount of rest days. And if you're not doing what you're supposed to do on those rest days too, you're going to be absolutely torched at the end of it, and potentially need to take an unplanned rest, which is, you know, not something we want to do. Or you're going to get into overtraining, and overreaching.
Yeah, I think it's really important to remember that training is much more than, it's not one single workout. It's an accumulation, you know, consistency and execution over time. And I think a lot of people get caught up on just trying to kick ass on one workout. And that's not the way it works. It's not, maybe we've watched too many like Rocky training sequences. You think, I just got to get super pumped and kick ass on this workout. But it's like, it's not about that. It's about doing it, you know, going to work day after day after day and getting it done. And, you know, not every day is going to be a kick-ass day. Most of it is just like clocking in, doing your work and clocking out, I think.
Yep. And, you know, I think one of the misleading, you know, one of the things that can throw people off is that when you do train hard and, you know, train intense, you see a benefit really quickly.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, wow, this is great. You know, I'm getting fit. I'm beating my friends in town line sprints. And, you know, the problem with that is then you're going to come off that fitness and the down is going to be real down. You know, you come off that fitness very quickly, and the valley on the backside tends to be deeper than if you have a progressive training plan and make your way, you know, increase fitness over time and in a sustainable fashion. You know, the kind of 3 on 1 off or 4 on 1 off, monitoring your fatigue and making sure that you do give yourself time to rest, because rest is when adaptation happens. If you don't rest, you don't benefit from the training you just did.
Yeah, well, I mean, we call it base training for a reason. And I think of the way houses get built, where you see like a house being built, and for months and months, they're digging holes and concrete. I'm not in construction, so forgive me. But it's like, it doesn't look like anything's happening for months and months, because they're laying the groundwork, they're pouring the concrete. And then when the house actually starts to go up, it's like, it seems to happen really quickly. But if you just, you know, you can just start building that house on no foundation and it goes up really quickly, but it's not on stable ground. Right. I think it's the same way with fitness, where you can get improvement really quickly, but it's not sustainable. And you start to, I'm mixing my metaphors here, but you start to, you know, run into the ceiling really, really quickly.
Absolutely. And, you know, one of the challenges I think for both of us is in it's kind of a danger zone, is when you have a client, say that's a professional, you know, say they're a doctor or something that's, you know, on call a lot, and they have a very limited amount of time to work. You know, again, I'm pulling from example here, but I had a PICU doctor who wanted to do Leadville.
Mm-hmm.
And he had, we sat down, we laid out his training plan, how much time he had, and he essentially had 6 hours a week to train. Well, Leadville is a race that's, more than 6 hours.
Right.
So,
The winning time's usually what, 8-9 hours for the
yeah,
pros.
8-ish, I think.
Yeah, probably
9
more
hours
like,
is real fast.
what do you get the buckle for? Under 12?
Yeah, under 12, you get one buckle, and then I think under 10, you get the baller buckle.
Okay.
And he wanted to finish under 12, and well-trained athlete, good mountain biker. So we had to figure out the right mix of intensity and volume. I still kind of kept that mix about the same in terms of how many times a week he was doing intensity versus volume. And he had to make some compromises, with his family a little bit to get the time in. And they bought into it because they knew he wanted to do it. But I didn't push a lot of intensity on him because the result would have been, he would have come off that fitness really quickly. And by the time we get to Leadville, he's overtrained or, off his peak.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think this is a really key, important question that we'd be skipping ahead a little bit. But it's a question a lot of people out there have that say, I've got, this all sounds good, a polarized training approach, but I only have 6 or 7 hours a week to train. So should I still maintain that same ratio? But I think before we talk about that, maybe we can define for people that may not be familiar with that term, with polarized training, what that means exactly to both of us.
I'll let you handle the formal definition of that one.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the key part is you keep your hard days hard and your easy days easy. In terms of percentages, generally you're talking the vast majority of the time is at the easy side of things, 80 to 90%, depending on how you're defining it. I tend to look at it by training days, so that 80% of the training days are easy days, meaning in a 3-zone model, zone 1, in a 5 or 6 zone model, zone 1 or 2. Now we can get into details on how you define that in terms of heart rate versus perceived exertion and power and stuff. But and then 10 to 20% of the time in that high zone, a pure polarized approach, as maybe Steven Seiler would describe it, would
80-20
be, not very little time in that zone 2 in a 3-zone model, or we're talking zone 3 and 4 in a 5 or 6 zone model. So in that mid range that a lot of people like to hang out on. Personally, I do have some of that in there. I do have with most athletes, some of that mid range in terms of building up to the really high intensity stuff. I think it's a huge shock to the system if you go right into it. But I think it's important to be clear. I define those as high intensity days. So practically what that means is, the way I think of it is, most weeks at 7 days a week, 5 of those days are pretty easy. Endurance, recovery, maybe some technique work, or a day off.
Right.
And then 2 on average, it might be 1 at certain times of the year, it might be 3, but it probably averages at about 2 high intensity days.
Yeah.
I think so
we're very much in line there. And I think that shift happens going from maybe 1 to 3 in terms of intensity as you get maybe within 4 to 6 weeks of maybe an A level event where you need to sharpen the knives a little bit. But it kind of works out to be 50 or 60 intense days a year if you really look at it. That's kind of all your body can handle.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, I think too, and again, I don't want to get too down in the dirt with all the details here, but I think some of these details are a little bit important, because I think some people might look at that and think, well, you're doing 5 days a week, the majority of your time just endurance, recovery, or off. That sounds kind of boring to me. Do you think it has to be boring?
No, I mean, there's a lot of nuance to, what an endurance ride can be too. And you mentioned something, skills. Skills are a huge part of being a bike racer. Mountain bikers need to learn how to do things like bunny hop, and, wheelies have a functional value on the trail. Road riding, practicing high-speed cornering, learning how to only take one arc through a turn, especially if you're a crit racer. You know, single leg pedal drills. There's lots of really important skills to learn. And as coaches, it's incumbent upon us to really figure out why you might need those. Having an athlete who has a dead spot in their pedal stroke, you could have a whole day of endurance riding that has some drills mixed in, or, high low cadence work. A zone 2 ride or a zone 1 ride doesn't just mean, go out there mindlessly and spin. There are things that need to happen sometimes.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. And another one I like to mix in there is pack skills. This is generally more specific to road cyclists, but if you've got a local, like, fast, flat group ride that's got a big pack, go in there and try to average the lowest power you can, or the lowest heart rate you can.
Absolutely.
And I think you can even do that I've been doing that a little bit on Zwift. There's been the Tour de Zwift going on lately, which are like generally these 1 hour group rides. And, I sit in there and I'm like, I want to do the best I can without my heart rate ever going above zone 2, which is challenging. What's that?
You should coach me now that I'm a new Zwifter. I'm trying to figure these things out.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it takes a lot of discipline, because you're never going all out. You're having to hold yourself back, and not respond to attacks and stuff when you see them going. And so the competitive part of me, it's like, it's hard to do that. But at the same time, I think that's a really important skill. Even somebody, I've been racing for a long time, I still need that discipline, and especially in a year where we didn't do much racing, it's good to practice some of those skills, because there will be times where I will be at my limit, and I'll have to conserve because I need to, not because I'm trying to do so for a workout. So I think the more you practice those, everybody thinks of cycling as just like training yourself to go harder and harder, but so much of it, in an endurance sport in general, is like efficiency and learning how to do what you need to do easier.
Oh yeah, I mean, we coaching with the juniors, you'd always get kids that would come to you and say, I'm a sprinter. Or I'm a climber. Well, can you, I can put out 1500 watts in a sprint. Well, great. Can you do it after 3 hours of bike racing? Do you know how to sit in the field completely sheltered for that 3 hours, so that you've got 13, 14, 1500 watts at the end of that ride? And that's a tough skill to learn, because we're all competitive, and it's hard not to chase those guys down the road sometimes, especially if a couple of them might be a threat. So that's another skill, pack riding, and pack pack riding practice, learning how to read a race and know when a breakaway might stick. Who's in the move? Are major teams represented? Is there going to be an organized chase? All of that stuff are valuable things that you can pull out of group rides.
Right. Yeah. So just to recap, those easy days, we can mix up the endurance, we can mix it up with terrain, we can mix it up with cadence, in the saddle, out of the saddle. We can mix it up in terms of what bike you're using, road or TT bike or mountain bike or gravel bike or whatever. On the, some of those days can be skills days, either technical skill, off-road, bike handling, descending, cornering, pedaling drills, pack skills, all sorts of things. And there's ways to make it, there's ways to add a lot of variety to that.
Absolutely. And, I do, with mountain biking, just to add in a little extra flavor, we might session something like, a rock garden, and work on getting through a technical feature, because it's part of a race and you're doing course reconnaissance. So, and I guess that applies to road too, is course reconnaissance can be a good time to do endurance ride.
Yeah. Okay, great. So I think we have gone over like what the polarized approach is, and I think we've established that we're both big believers in that. Getting back to the question of the people who are really time crunched, and say they've only got 6 or 7 hours a week to train, or maybe I should say, why should they still maintain that same ratio? Why is that important?
Well, first of all, their work and life load is still quite high. So if you had like a TSS attached to 24-hour shifts at the hospital, the potential for overtraining somebody, even if they're doing less volume, is very high. So making sure that it's, to me, very important that you keep that mix the same, because there is a higher risk than maybe with a client who has more time. There's a higher risk that you're gonna overtrain them because they don't have the recovery that they need, after a workout session. I've had several clients like that who have very stressful, high-powered jobs, and they do a workout and then they go and they work for 12 hours and they get like 3 hours of sleep. And if I'm giving them a really intense workout the next day, they're not going to be super successful with it. So as a coach, I've also got to pick what days we do those intense workouts on. They may be on weekend days where typically you might throw a lot of volume at them. So, it's very much a balancing act. And if you throw in more intensity, you lose that balance.
Yeah. But I also know that there's a lot of people who maybe don't feel like they have a lot of stress. They feel like I can handle 5 days a week of high intensity. Now, maybe that's not true, but they feel like, look, my job's not that hard. I sit at a desk all day. I just don't have that much time. And I want to make the most of it. And sometimes they're coming from, maybe they've been in the sport for a long time. So they know what it's like to be at a high level. And they feel like, well, when I was in my 20s, I was doing 15, 20 hours a week training. Now I'm only doing, 6 or 7. I can handle it.
Yeah.
I mean, I
Yeah.
think it's,
Well, I've definitely succumbed to that stress before, and, both personally, and I've let clients, you know, had that kind of fight with them on, this is the way I want you to do it. And they want to do high intensity stuff. And okay, let's try it your way for a little bit. And the explosion is epic. And and
yeah,
it comes. And, then there's a kind of a reckoning conversation of, you know, you trained really hard for 2 weeks, you're destroyed now, and you're going to miss your event because you couldn't sustain that level of fitness. And for myself, because I've got nothing better to do, and I never listen to myself as a coach, just making myself more and more and more tired because I want to ride fast with my buddies. It's not sustainable.
yeah. Can you talk a little bit about what that explosion, I think you called it, what that looks like?
Yeah, dead legs, lethargy, that feeling that heavy legs is the feeling that I always hear from people, and just inability to hit your training goals. Your heart rate may be elevated. You may not be able to get it there.
Yeah.
Lack of sleep. I've had people who, have trouble sleeping. There's all kinds of physiological side effects from that, being overtrained or being really fatigued. But I think it all comes down to not being able to perform when you need to be able to perform.
Yeah. I think there's a really high cost to maintaining very high level of fitness, and people neglect that or they fail to appreciate that.
It's not sustainable.
But like you said earlier, I think that you do get, doing a lot of high intensity, you get a quick sort of bang for the buck. You feel the improvement really quickly, maybe within weeks of doing a lot of that stuff versus months or years of doing like steady endurance rides, building up a good base. But yeah, it's not sustainable. And it's like, it's one thing to do training and have it benefit you, especially the high intensity work. It's like you feel the benefits, great. But if you're just doing that and getting no benefit, it's really, I think it's really tough physically and mentally. I mean, I think of it like, Black Panther, had the suit where every time he got hit or every time he got shot, it absorbed the energy and then he could release it. Like, that's like training. But if you don't have the Black Panther suit, you're just getting punched in the face.
Yep.
By your training.
Yeah, it just continually hurts and hurts and hurts.
Yeah, that's tough.
Yeah. Yep. I actually see it more. I certainly see it with cyclists, but we see it from the strength training and body work side of things here at the office. We see it a lot from runners, because runners buy their marathon plan and it's fixed. And if they miss a day, they just train through everything. And, there's no respite. And man, when things come crashing down, we often see this in the office. There's a smoking hole in the ground, and it stinks because there's still that marathon that they were training for, and now there's a month setback because they were pushing past the zones that they were supposed to be in. And I think that is one of the dangers of the non-coached internet plan, is that mentality of being competitive with yourself sometimes and telling yourself, well, I'm just going to push the top end of this or push into that next zone. And there's no objective voice there to say, hey, Ben, you went too hard. You need to back off, or like you said, the price is going to be high.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of tools that have attempted to do that. I mean, you got the You know, these things, measures HRV, recovery score, and resting heart rate and stuff. And people can, a lot of people are looking at their training stress balance, but there's a lot that doesn't account for, that none of those things can account for, that might be other types of stress you have in your life that might not show up. And I think not all stress is different. I'm sorry, not all stress is the same. We talk about like and I think you use this phrase of the dials, the intensity dial and the volume dial, but really there's a bunch of dials, right? I mean, and they can produce different types of stress with different types of cadence, and maybe weather conditions might beat you up in different ways. So, you know, just looking at TSB, I think won't always account for that. It is nice to see to have the human interaction.
I take TSB with a grain of salt. I really do. You know, it's kind of a secondary indicator for me. I like to have a conversation because you can tell in somebody's voice if they are distressed. You know, if somebody has a relative that passes away, or you know, they had a breakup in their relationship or something like that, or you know, they lost their job. All of those things are really high stress factors that can impact training. And one athlete might deal with them in a very negative way, and one athlete might use their training as an outlet, and actually those, you know, have a really positive response to that. You know, that it feeds their drive to train harder. So then you become the coach who has to temper that a little bit. So like you said, yeah, absolutely. Everybody is different. And I think that can be one of the weaknesses of training stress balance, is it doesn't take into account those external factors.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which are hugely important.
It's only, I mean, it's based on a TSS, training stress score for workouts, which is a factor of time and intensity ultimately. Now, maybe that's a better measure than any other objective measure that's just, you know, one single score, but it's still really just time and intensity.
Yep. It's not, you know, mental health, physical well-being. You know, if an athlete's telling me they're feeling crappy, we may change things a little bit. You know, that's this input, this measuring tool right here is a very important one, and one that gets cast aside, I think, too often with all this data.
So we talked about the dangers of doing too much intensity. I think cover that pretty well. Do you think there's danger in doing too much volume?
Yeah. You know, because you can still accumulate fatigue by doing too much volume. Now, you know, with a pro, that's a very different, you know, a guy who's training 25, 30 hours a week, that's a very different equation from somebody, you know, say you've got a new client who 4 to 5 hours a week is the most they've ever ridden in their lives. And they want to do some sort of, you know, century oriented event. You can't just start throwing 100-mile rides at them left and right. You need to ease them into that level of volume. And I think, yes, there's absolutely a danger of too much too quick, especially for a new athlete who's not used to that much volume.
Yeah. Well, I tend to think it's not usually the volume itself that's the problem, at least with cycling. Obviously, and you sort of hinted about this with runners a little bit. You know, in a weight-bearing sport, it's a lot different. There's a lot more danger that you can really have an injury, versus most of the injuries in cycling, aside from crashes, are chronic problems, not acute injuries. But everybody's got these. Nobody's bike fit is perfect, but especially if it's really bad, those problems are, if you're on a really crappy saddle, that's going to magnify. If you've got these old chamois that are in bad shape, that's going to magnify, the more volume you do.
There's a ton of repetition in cycling.
Yeah.
And it compiles. Yeah. Yep.
So, if you got problems after 1 hour, it's going to be even worse after 6 hours, even if you're keeping the intensity low. And also, I think a lot of people go a little, as we talked about earlier, go too hard, a certain percentage of the time. And so if you're doing that, you're going too hard 10% of the time on an endurance ride, well, that's going to be worse for if you're doing 20 hours a week than it will at 8 or 10.
And we signed up for a sport that pain is kind of part of the game, and I don't mean pain in terms of your knee hurting, but endurance sports are difficult, and they're difficult for long periods of time, and there's a level of discomfort that we must tolerate to be good at our sport.
Mm-hmm.
We're lying to ourselves essentially. And one of the risks of that is we get in the business of also lying to ourselves about something that might be hurting, and we're just like, oh, that's just a symptom of training, and it's not a big deal. Well, when there's pain in your body's trying to tell you something. Something's not right, and it's looking for change. So all too often we ignore that pain, and it becomes a problem. It becomes a knee issue or a hip issue, or a ligament issue that is much more serious than it was to begin with.
Yeah. Ultimately, I guess a lot of this comes down to productive stress versus non-productive stress. It's one thing to be suffering and have it be productive and stimulate adaptations that are going to get you fitter, stronger. It's another thing to have stress either from a lot of volume, a lot of intensity, or non-training things, other types of stress that just sort of punch you in the face for no value.
Yep, exactly.
All right, bonus question: best cycling car, wagon or SUV?
I'm absolutely in the wagon camp. I like my cars low, unless it's a truck. So I'm going to go with, I love my VW TDI wagon.
Yeah.
I think the TDI wagon is an excellent cycling vehicle. But I would also, if we were going with the newest model possible out there, I think, Volkswagen's V90 wagon, or not Volkswagen, Volvo V90 is super sweet. It's got this cool modular rack system. Bobby Julich has one. I got to kind of play with a modular roof system on it a little bit. It's pretty snazzy. I would, if I were making more money than I am right now, I would have one of those probably.
I knew so many people back in the day that drove like old Volvo wagons, and I think spent a lot of time traveling to bike races. And my mom used to have one too, and it was a great, dependable car, but it had just the hardest headrest and armrest, just like destroyed your body.
They're more comfortable now, and they have all kinds of like whiz bang kind of features in them.
Yeah, I am aware of it. We used to have an Acura TSX wagon. We had to sell it when we moved to China, and it wasn't the most powerful thing, but man, that car was so nice, and just wish we had held on to that car. But I have to say, this is not a cool answer, but I love a minivan for taking to.
We're not wrong.
You know, just the ability to lay down those back seats, slide your bikes right in the back there. If you've got kids, you know, you can flip down the TV screens.
Oh man, when I coached at Duke, for years and years, we had minivans when we would travel, and yeah, those back seats just folded right in, and you rolled the bikes in. The only danger was if you got the seat belt wrapped around like a seat post or something, and it kind of locked. You had to figure out a way to get the seat belt to release.
True.
But I've definitely done some bike vacations. Even my wife and I did Moab with a minivan, and all the cool people were out there with their Tacomas and the tailgate pads, and we're rolling in with the the Chrysler minivan with our bikes rolled in the back.
Yeah, I did have one buddy who had a minivan, and he insisted, because of the mounts he had, that you take your seat post off when you put it in there to mount it on the interior rack. And I'm like, dude, I don't want to do that. I don't want to have to put back on my seat post, and I don't know if it's torqued right or whatever.
Got your carbon prep that you're breaking up every time. Yeah, wrong answer.
Anyway,
I'll give you credit on the minivan, though. I'll give you credit on the minivan.
Okay. Thanks for joining us, everybody. Please like and subscribe, and if you've got any comments or questions or suggestions for future episodes, put it in the comments. Thanks for watching.